I'd hung out with him once before during New Year's 2010 when we'd done the bonding thing. Together, we'd gushed about Marshall, each other, and relationships, which was both easier and more difficult to do while taking tequila shots. During Dave's San Francisco visit, I'd been tirelessly campaigning for his approval, planning a series of outings to keep him reeling in tourist activity overdrive. On his last day, we were headed to Alcatraz, the former federal prison and national park, something Dave had been itching to see. I'd even managed to get my hot green hands on special ferry tickets, courtesy of Wicked company manager Tanase, which meant VIP boarding in a separate line. It was the final feather in my "let me impress you so that you might like me" cap, since the Official Siblings and Significant Others guidebook clearly stated that Dave would have to grant me official clearance before I was, in bro-to-bro terms, totally cool. Monday night, we began our sunset ferry ride from Pier 33 through the frigid, choppy waters, circling the island as we approached. "Classic Michael Bay wraparound shot," Marshall said. "Classic Mike," Dave agreed. Yes, conversation on the ferry consisted of my listening to the Roy boys comment on and quote that movie The Rock, then banter more generally in their special hybrid language made up of semi-ironic spy talk and macho jargon, including downloading intel to mean checking email and guns to mean muscles. Finally, we arrived on the Rock for its spooky night tour, the last of the day. Once inside, we opted for its audio guide, which featured real inmates and guards talking about their experiences those many years ago. Stationed on a 22-acre island in the middle of the bay, Alcatraz had been one of the most infamous federal prisons of all time. In its day, it housed the criminals' criminals, the uber bad boys who had worn out their welcomes elsewhere. Closed in 1963, Alcatraz had reopened for the past couple of decades as a museum and truly righteous tourist trap. Together with our tour group, Marshall, Dave, and I stalked up and down the first cell block lane, peering through the bars at the abandoned cells. Some were empty, while some had been set up to look as they might have back in the day, inhabited by prisoners years into their sentences. "Pretty cool, right?" I said to Dave, as our footsteps echoed off the concrete. "It's totally the best," he said, at which point I mentally fist-pumped with myself. I am so totally cool. We walked on. Moonlight seeped through the barred windows while clusters of bulbs dimly lit the way. When we reached a new aisle, I squinted to examine a plaque on the wall, which hung in front of a cell. It described favorite prisoner pastimes, and accordingly, the display included an easel, an assortment of drawing implements, cards, and a board game that looked like checkers. Prisoners would pass the time, the plaque said, confined to a small space, where they tried to amuse themselves through hours of boredom. Ha! A few paces more, and I turned to Marshall, who had wedged his face between two metal bars. I tapped his shoulder, relaying my eureka moment. "Just like a standby." "I was going to say the same thing," he said, giving me a palm-burning high five. "I've got to text Libby." Nearby, Dave was creeping into an open cell. Soon Marshall had joined him, and they started snapping photos of each other sitting on a tiny cell toilet, while I got a text back from my wife. "Libby, 7:21 p.m. You're so insane." We continued around the bend and through the prisoner cafeteria while I smiled in self-satisfied glee. I felt so clever to have drawn such a darkly funny conclusion. Standbys are like prisoners, chortle chortle. Next, we neared a solitary confinement cell. Through my headphones, a former inmate described the psychological challenges of spending so much time in isolation. In total darkness, he would throw a coin in the air, wait for the clinking sound of it hitting the ground, then scramble to find it. This he did over and over, to ease the pain of loneliness and monotony. Chortle, chortle? This wasn't funny. Even if I'd felt alone sometimes, reeling from the challenges Wicked presented me, it had never really been the case. No, not at all. I thought of Marshall, then Libby, Andy Ty, Nick, Nika, and the whole game night crew. And of course, Eden. My coworkers, my friends. None of us was ever alone. At the end of the tour, we looped back and exited to the grounds, passing the residential buildings that had once held the prison guards and their wives and children. Their lives, the tour explained, were actually comfortable, albeit isolated. Here, surrounded by water, they had formed their own little community, ferrying into the city to go to school, gather supplies, and reintegrate with the rest of civilization. I thought of the rest of the Wicked cast, all of whom had family, friends, and lives outside of San Francisco. We had shared a singular experience, one that had never been and would never be again. Together, it seemed, we had lived on our own island, on an island of Wicked. As we waited in line to reboard and head back to the mainland, I thought of my own family back east. How were they doing now that my grandmother was gone? How were my parents and my sister now that she was applying to colleges? What was real life like since I had catapulted over the rainbow? What would it be like to go back? A twilight glow lingered over the choppy ocean. I realized that the days here in Oz had blurred together as one long stretch of time, somehow separate and in a different universe spinning on its own axis. In doing Wicked, I had taken steps toward a new future. Now that I was on the brink of returning home, my future felt as unlimited as ever. I remembered my rehearsals with Brian. What is an unlimited future? Not bound by conventional strictures, by the shackles that have always held me back. As I felt the fairy rock and cradle me, I glanced over at Marshall, who, against the backdrop of a cloudy night sky, was debating with Dave over which was a better aircraft, a helicopter or a Zeppelin. Becky's words echoed in my head. You and Marshall are not you and Matt. He'd seemed too good to be true. But he had come true. So much had. I had played Elphaba, not just once, over 40 times. I had forged a lifelong friendship and learned that you can't judge a standby's book by her sparkly cover. I had learned how to live far away from home. I had learned to deal with tremendous loss of a loved one and of a piece of home itself. I had learned how to let go of past losses. I had yanked back the curtain to see the formidable wizard of theater, examining him as he pushed buttons, pulled levers, and tugged his vast network of strings. Here in Oz, I had learned what it meant to be green, inside and out, as I fumbled my way to becoming a professional actor. So what would happen next? I knew better than to try to predict the future, but still, I just wanted to know. Would there still be time for dreaming? On closing night, we all wore our evening best. For Libby, this meant a short black number. For Nika, a blue and black floor-length gown topped by our Jennifer Lopez updo circa 2007. For me, a spandex dress with a rooster's tail that had looked much cuter in the store's skinny mirrors. I'm going to miss you, girl, said Nika, batting her ridiculously long lashes at me. Then there'd better be major double dating in our future, I said, or at least treadmill trotting. Come visit me in L.A., said Nika, drifting out the door and into the girls' dressing room. I definitely will, I called after her, hoping this would be true, silently wishing her the best. On this, the last night, many of us had exchanged cards or goodbye post-its. I myself had photoshopped famous works of art so they looked green, the statue of David, the Mona Lisa, the Birth of Venus, and handed them out in little envelopes. I, of course, took special care to write Libby a long, sappy, I love you forever and ever note with hearts and stars drawn around the perimeter. Together, she and I watched the company's final performance from the back of the mezzanine, where we hugged and shed many sloppy tears. Neither of us was a parent, but we decided the experience was like saying goodbye to our problem child after he went away to college. Sure, we'd miss him, the tickle fights, the gold star book reports, but we certainly wouldn't miss shuttling him to soccer practice, meeting him in the principal's office, or force-feeding him vegetables. He was a grown-up now, and we had the rest of our lives to live. When the show ended, Libby and I joined the company on stage. Together we stood, holding hands through the applause, and took one final bow. Okay, that's it. I hope you liked Chapter 19. Read the rest of the book and comment on the book club. Thanks a lot. Bye.